Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you hit the grades of your dreams at school, college, and university through the science of fast learning and lasting memory, the psychology of study productivity, and the secrets to great exam technique. And now your host, the Cambridge University trained psychologist who's dedicated his life to helping students study better and outsmart their exams, William Wadsworth.
Whether you're an elite athlete, a high-performing business person, prominent politician, or even the Dalai Lama, chances are you've got a coach who's responsible for making sure that each and every day you show up as the very best version of yourself that you can be. One such coach is Lucy Ratcliffe, who works with senior leaders at major companies like Comcast, American Express, and Citigroup to make sure they show up with the mindset to win each and every day and to shine when it really matters. So I'm absolutely thrilled that she's here on the Exam Study Expert podcast to share some of those insights from decades of teaching and help you as a student be the very best possible version of yourself, whether that's managing your stress and anxiety, finding ways to feel good about the opportunities in front of you, or just how to deliver a performance on exam day that's worthy of those top grades. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. I certainly got a lot out of it, and I've been thinking about these sorts of things for years. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So Lucy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
I'd love to start by having you share a bit more of your story, because I think there are some fascinating lessons for people in the choices you've made through your life.
Well, the genuine answer to that question, Will, is it's a total accident how I ended up doing the work that I'm doing today. So I started out all through my childhood and teenage years being utterly obsessed with the theatre and performance, and my dream was to be the greatest actress of my generation. I came from a theatrical background. My parents were both writers, so I'd grown up in a very chaotic, artistic, creative environment where the thing that had set my parents free in their lives was education. They were both of them, the first people in their families to get into university, and they both got into Oxford University. So we're there in the late 50s, early 60s, having a fine time. So I grew up with the passion for the theatre and the desire to do something with my brain. Both of those things were really prized in my family. And so I followed a fairly traditional path, worked really hard at school, got into a great university, studied English literature at York University, and all through that time was performing all of the time, doing lots and lots of theatre primarily. I wrote a one-woman show. Looking back now, I can't quite believe I had the chutzpah to do this, but I performed a one-woman show that I'd written about John Keats's girlfriend, Fanny Brawn, for Kenneth Branagh's theatre company. I won't go into the details of the story, but I basically grabbed him in the theatre bar where I was working as an usher selling programmes and said, "I've written a play which I think you should read." And at the time I hadn't written the play, so that was one of the early lessons to me in confidence and doing things that help you rely on instinct rather than necessarily judgment. So I performed a great deal all through my university career as well, decided not to go to drama school, which was one of the conventional paths people in my position took, and got some work as an actor and had a wonderful time all through my 20s doing all sorts of great work, and also, like most actors, being out of work for big chunks of time, which was one of the things that I found very, very difficult and very frustrating. So in one of those periods where I was horribly out of work, one of my friends said to me, "I've met this woman that I think you should meet. She's this crazy Scottish woman and she works with actors in business." And I had no idea really what any of this was about, but turned up to meet Caroline Sammy, as she was then, Caroline McHugh, as she became, who saw something in me that I had not seen in myself and said to me, "I'd love you to come and work with me as a workshop assistant." So back in those days, our business was called Perfect Pitch, and it was very straight down the line presentation skills. We worked with people on helping them prepare and deliver fantastic pitches and presentations. And the link between performance and business was something that we went very big on in those days. So Caroline employed lots of actors to help bring our workshops to life. And it was great fun, high energy. We did lots of work with industries like advertising agencies, big corporate organisations like British Airways and Sony were our big clients back then. And that's how it began. And within 2 or 3 years, I tried to run both careers simultaneously. But within 2 or 3 years, I realized that this was my real love. So I stopped acting and devoted myself full time to working with Caroline as her apprentice, was lucky enough to travel the world with her, learning our work from the ground up in all sorts of amazing locations and different environments. And that's really what led me to the place I'm in today. So as an organization, Ideology works all over the world with a variety of different clients, from advertising, marketing, media, banking, professional sports. So we get to work with all kinds of different people in different environments, asking some of the questions that we'll touch on today and exploring some of the things that help people define their own success and what that word means to them. So complete accident, had no idea this world existed and fell upon it. You could call it fate, or you could call it luck. But yeah, it was definitely me finding my home when I met Caroline.
I mean, I love that so much about that, because when I talk to young people today, a lot of the time people either have no idea what they're trying to do in life, or they have such a fixed idea of what the road their life is going to take falling ahead of them. It so often happens to people that you end up thinking you're going to start in one place and then you end up doing something totally different, but it's what you absolutely love and what you were born to do. So just that kind of serendipity of finding your way into what you really want. I also really love the Kenneth Branagh anecdote. I think that idea that if you want something, you just ask, and the worst that can happen is they'll say no.
I think the interesting thing about that is if I'd stopped to think too hard about consequence, I'm sure even my bold, ambitious 18-year-old self would have gone, oh dear, no, not a good idea. But it was that precise combination between motivation, I was very ambitious, but equally, I'm just going to do it without allowing my thinking to get in the way and tell me the things that could go wrong.
For sure. I was curious, when you're sort of looking back at your own experiences as a young person, sort of back in the day at high school and university, and potentially from your more recent experience of working with people of that sort of age, what are the sort of the biggest challenges you see in terms of sort of mindset and people at that age projecting the best version of themselves to the world?
One of the things that terrifies me as a parent of a young pre-teenage daughter is how much harder I think it is now for young people to forge their way through their education and into their early career. Back in my day, 100 years ago, it was, if you got into a decent university and were reasonably smart, worked reasonably hard, it was much more a case for my generation that we got to pick and choose what we did. And we had lots of organizations coming to talk to us all of the time about the opportunities there might be. Now, I do a lot of work with young women in particular who are starting out in education, just in their university education specifically. And I know things are very, very different now. So my experience of working with people of that age is that you have to work twice as hard. You have to be really focused about what it is that you're working towards. And by that, I don't mean having a clearly mapped out career path necessarily. I've just given you my example of how mine completely evolved along the way. But I think that motivation to make something of the opportunities that you have in front of them, or to move towards being the best version of yourself you can be, for want of a better phrase. I think the work that we do is very much connected with possibility and potential. So it's a combination of recognizing, okay, if I want to move forward in my life, I need to work hard. That's the qualification criteria. But also be connected and committed to that journey in our own development that is so important, the desire to move and grow and evolve different parts of ourselves as we go through the different stages of our lives. I think that's one of the most important skills for young people starting out in education and in the world of work today, to be flexible enough and to be able to ask big questions of themselves around not what do I want to do for a living, but who do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to live? How can I be better and more skillful at applying all the different skills and talents that I have in the service of those goals? So my advice is always to ask the best possible questions of yourself. And those questions will lead you towards an answer. It might not be a nice, neat answer with a full stop at the end, because I think we're always in the process of evolving and moving forward. But if you focus on asking really strong, powerful questions around what makes you feel happy, what makes you feel alive, what makes you feel like you, it's not a bad starting point.
It sounds like for you, the answer to those questions at, say age 18 was a lot about performing and sharing something with the world, I guess. And when you were talking about, motivation and drive, is that sort of where you see motivation coming from? That idea that you want to, where you want to end up and what you want to share with the world?
It's a massive subject, and everything that I talk about is based on a combination of experience and intuition. So I like to describe it as informed intuition rather than necessarily hard data and science, although there is all of that stuff to back some of this up. But my perception of motivation is that it's energy. It's the energy that drives us to get out of bed in the morning, to get up and go through the ordinary magic of living every day. So I think understanding where your motivation comes from and what creates it in you. And I think that's where science is not necessarily as helpful as self-awareness in this, because I think that's different for all of us. And I think, again, by focusing on asking questions like, what makes me feel alive? What am I doing when I feel most like myself? Those are the sorts of questions that can help us tap into our awareness of our motivation and recognize that it's personal. But again, I think going back to the point I made about having to be really good and work really hard for the young people starting out in their careers and in education today, understanding your own drivers and your own motivation, what gives you that energy, is such useful work, because it helps you point yourself in the right direction, in the direction where you're going to find the things that help you find that space in the universe that's got your name on it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of potential roadblocks on the way to success. A lot of points where you might fall off the rails. You might not be getting the grades you want. You might be finding a course harder than you anticipated. Any advice for kind of getting back on with things and refinding that motivation if you're stuck in a bit of a rut, or you're just starting to doubt yourself?
I think the thing that I talk about most often in the work that I do with, and this could be with graduates or senior leaders sitting at the top of enormous corporations, one of the things that tends to unite people in those very different stages of their careers is how their internal conversation can be the biggest determinant of their individual success, whatever that word means to each individual, or failure. So in my experience in the work that we do at Ideology, helping people understand that internal conversation, what we're saying to ourselves, and understanding where that's useful and where that holds us back, is one of the most significant things that we can do to help ourselves get past those roadblocks.
So internal conversation then is sort of that, it's what we tell ourselves about the world around us and ourselves. So it might be, I don't know, I'm not very good at maths, or I'm finding this hard, or that kind of thing. Is that the sort of thing you mean?
Exactly. So those are both great examples, Will. So you find yourself on a course or faced with some revision in a subject that you're finding really challenging. Depending on how you show up in that internal conversation, the voices in your head that you allow yourself to listen to will make the biggest difference in what you're then able to go on and do. So if you face a piece of work thinking, this is impossible, I can't do this, I've always been terrible at maths and I've never been any good at it, why am I even doing this course? We go into this catastrophic thinking in our own minds. The voices in our heads take us to that position of disaster very, very quickly. So if you can catch yourself in the action of going down one of those rabbit holes in your own thinking, you get a golden opportunity by noticing that to then make a different choice about whether you're going to listen to that voice in your head. It's very different if faced with a really difficult, challenging piece of work or a course that you find difficult to think, and say to yourself, right, this is hard. And if I'm going to have any chance of doing what I want to do, on this course or this piece of work, then I need to work out what I need to do to be able to do the best I can. I need to back myself that I can do this. There's a lovely old cliche that goes back to the beginning of time where people will say a version of whatever you tell yourself you can or can't do, you'll be right.
Yeah.
So our philosophy is very connected to that. We can create our own success or failure in the way that we think and the way that we allow ourselves to connect to those thoughts. One of the most useful things, I think, and something I will talk to clients about all the time, is a thought like, I'm terrible at maths, is not a fact. That's a perception. That's an internal perception that we're feeling in response to something being difficult. So recognizing that a thought is not a fact, it's just a thought. It's just something that's passing across your mind like a cloud will pass across the sky. And by recognizing that, you get to engage with the thought differently and know that, okay, there might be a cloud, but in a minute, the sun can come out again. So it gives us that opportunity to observe our thinking and ask a really simple question. Does it help me to think that I'm terrible at maths right now? Or is it getting in my way? And if the answer is it's not helpful, then there are some simple things you can do to help you create thoughts that are more useful.
So what would be the next steps then? What would you suggest for dealing with those kind of thoughts once we've acknowledged them?
Well, there's a device in our work that we use to help people analyze the different sides of our internal conversation, the positive voices in our heads that drive us forward and the negative voices that hold us back. And we have based that technique on an old legend that shows up in many, many different cultures. And some of you may well have come across a version of this before. So in the story we talk about, the protagonist is a Native American Indian chief, and one of the members of his tribe goes to him one day and says, tell me, how do you win the battle in your head between the good things you think about yourself and the bad things you think about yourself? So the chief thinks for a moment, and then he said, well, I see that battle as the fight between two dogs. There's the good dog in my head, and there's the bad dog in my head. So the brave thinks for a moment and says, well, which dog wins the fight? And the chief says, whichever dog I feed the most. So this gives us a really useful analogy for helping us analyze those two different sides of our thinking. The good dog that can be really, really good. That little voice in your head that tells you you've got this, you can, you always pull this off, you can do it. Often a very simple, insistent voice versus the bad dog that can be really mean. And I think one of the really useful questions always to ask of yourself when you're in one of those situations, when you're caught up in your own negative thinking, is would you talk to anybody else in the way that you talk to you sometimes? So would you say to one of your friends or somebody in your family that you're really stupid and you're terrible at that? And maybe the answer is yes, in which case you've got some other work to do. But for most people, they wouldn't dream of talking to another human being in the way that they talk to themselves sometimes. So the good dog, bad dog analogy enables us to be able to separate ourselves from the emotion of thinking something like, I'm terrible at this, I can't do it, to that place of objectivity where we can ask some simple questions like, is that true that I'm useless at this? Where's the evidence to support that thought? Or what would be a more useful thought to think right now? Maybe thinking, I can do this and I'll give it a go and see how well I can get through this. Maybe those sorts of lines of thinking, like where you're backing yourself, are more useful in those sorts of crisis situations where we're doubting ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, just from observation, it seems that with social media and Facebook and Snapchat and all the rest of it, people are so often presenting these fantastic versions of themselves to their friends, and it's they're showing off their very best attributes. So it's so easy to when you see all of that feel quite inferior by comparison. And so finding those ways, as you're saying, to feed the good dogs, feed the good thoughts about what does make you you and a really valuable person in the world. What are you good at? What do you do well? And focus on that and downplay the negative as much as you can. Yeah. I don't know if you've come across Carol Dweck's line of work on growth mindset, but she talks about, we've sort of been using I'm bad at maths as a bit of an example, but she would say, whenever you catch yourself telling yourself I'm bad at maths, change that. Don't say I'm bad at maths, say I'm not very good at maths yet. And adding that word yet adds that element of potential that, with a bit of, if you continue to strive and to put in the right kind of effort, you might be able to turn the situation around.
Absolutely. I think I'm very big fan of Carol Dweck's work, and there are many experts working in this field saying a version of the same thing. So I think it's always great to recognise when there's that consistency of voices saying something that is very connected, which is that we are the author of those voices. We can change the conversation, and by changing the conversation, you change the outcome. And I think that's one of the most powerful things to hold on to, not just in the context that we're talking around about study and education, but the point you make about social media, where there are so many voices conspiring to make us feel less in whatever way, whether it's how we look, how clever we are, all those different judgments that are out there trying to put us all into boxes. By focusing on the one thing we can take control of, which is ourselves, and understanding how to talk to ourselves, how to esteem ourselves, how to make choices based on simple things like observing how we're thinking and feeling. That's work that pays off. And I think if some of the senior leaders that I work with across the world had been taught how to do that at 18, 19 years old, in the way that we're lucky enough to get to work with young people today at that stage in their lives, who knows where their potential could have got to. Because I think, as Carol Dweck's work recognises, the potential for growth in our own brains is extraordinary. And the more we understand ourselves, the better placed we are, I think, to be able to tap into some of that potential.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. I wanted to talk a little bit about performing under pressure, because I know this is something you help business leaders with a lot today, performing in the presentation and so forth. I think there's something in there for students as well. There's a lot of pressurized situations when you're a student, be that performing in an exam situation, or perhaps if you're in a lot of college and university level courses now have a heavily interactive style of lecture, where you actually get graded on your performance in that lecture or in that seminar, and what you contribute to that class debate. Do you have any kind of starter advice for students in those kind of circumstances for handling performing under pressure?
Well, one of the things that I think can be really significant is recognizing that often some of the feedback we're given, and often by people that are very well-meaning, maybe it's friends or family or people that care about us, people will often tell us in those high pressure situations not to be nervous. And I think that's advice that is of very little help to us when we're in the grip of often really powerful physical, emotional symptoms. I've worked with people that get so nervous. One woman used to faint before she had to give presentations to senior audiences. And people that are sick burst into tears. Really powerful physical manifestations of the nerves. And to be told by anybody not to feel that is another pressure. So we try and squash the nerves down and make them disappear. Whereas really, I think the most useful thing to do is to welcome them in and recognize that your nerves are, if you flip it around and see them in a different light, they're your performance adrenaline. They're the things that are going to help you rise to the challenge that's been set. So even after all these years of performing and delivering the work that I do, I still get really nervous. I've got a session coming up this week, which I've been nervous about for months, ever since I knew it was in my diary. And I've trained myself to think, not only is that okay, but it's useful. It's what's going to get me through. It's going to give me the energy and the drive to do a good job. So the first thing to do is to welcome in your nerves and accept that they're a useful part of the process. I think there's a lot of work too that's being done around understanding how useful things like mindfulness and meditation can be. So even if you strip that down into its most basic form, which is allowing yourself to breathe deeply as you walk into the exam room, as you face the pressure that you're in front of, allowing yourself to connect to your breath and be calm and collected so that you can be in the optimum state to be able to deliver on whatever you have to do. And the third thing that I think is really important, as well as the breathing, is to plant that voice in your head that tells you that you'll be fine. You've got this, back yourself. That's the two things that I will say to myself before a challenge still are trust yourself, and energy. In my work, it's important for me to be energized in my delivery. Otherwise, nobody else will be. So there'll be a different version of that for everybody. But developing that little internal conversation with yourself, or mantra, if that is a useful phrase. It can be a bit loaded for some people, but a little line that reminds you that you'll be fine, that you've got this. So it's the combination of allowing the nervous energy in, because it's an important part of the process, staying calm through that so that the nerves don't paralyze us, and backing yourself, trusting yourself. Even the most horrible exam will be finished at some point, and you'll still be alive at the end of it. Life will still go on. So I think the perspective that brings, whatever happens, I'm going to be okay, is a useful message, I think, to plant.
When we're breathing, any thoughts on exactly how we do that? Is it just about slowing the breathing down and breathing more deeply and consciously?
I think the most important thing to do, and this is where the age-old piece of advice comes into play, is to breathe deeply from the diaphragm. What happens when we're nervous is we tend to start breathing from the chest. So I'm doing it now, and you can hear the difference in my voice. I'm literally running out of air because there's no breath to support me. It's a horrible place to be. So particularly if you're in an oral exam, if you're panic breathing, you've got no breath to support you, and you're going to feel horrible. So one of the things to do just before you fall asleep at night is a good time to practice this. And anybody that does any kind of sport or practices yoga will be very connected to different forms of breathing, is to just, like when you're lying down, put your hands on your stomach and feel the natural motion of your stomach being pushed in and out. That's the diaphragm working. And that's the state of breath that we're born with. When you look at a newborn baby breathing, you'll see their little tummies going in and out. And as we grow up and become more affected by pressures of bad posture and running around and doing lots of things at the same time, our posture becomes worse and worse. So we forget to breathe in the way that we're designed to, which is those deeply supported diaphragmatic breath. So by pushing your breath down, taking the deepest breath that you can, and if you're doing it from the diaphragm, breathing from the diaphragm, there should be no movement at all in your chest. It should all come from your stomach. So it pushes the stomach right out. If you imagine a pair of bellows inside your stomach, the air expands the bellows, and then you've got the power of the breath to push up over your vocal cords to form the sound. So slowing your breathing down, deepening it, and taking your time. I think 2 or 3 deep breaths before walking into an exam room, or before walking into an oral exam in particular, is going to stand you in good stead.
I'm doing it right now, and I'm feeling a lot better already.
Well, it does. It calms us down. It makes us feel better.
I mean, you did a lot of acting when you were growing up. Would you ever advise, not necessarily acting, but some kind of, I guess, practice in working under pressure and perhaps performing under pressure for those that particularly for those who it feels kind of uncomfortable to do? Would that be a good thing for people to incorporate into their lives?
A couple of things there. I think practicing anything helps us to build competence, which helps us in turn build confidence, which is one of the key things that we talk about in our work. Pushing yourself into situations that are uncomfortable. So if you're naturally introverted and hate the thought of any kind of performance, it's probably an interesting path for you to follow, to explore where that discomfort comes from and push yourself into those places which make you feel uncomfortable. So that's always a piece of advice I give all of the people I work with. What makes you feel really uncomfortable? Whatever that is, it's a fairly good indication that it'd be useful for you to get better at that and build your competence in it. So the skills of performance, and we see this in our work all the time. If you're really good at giving a presentation, public speaking, you tend to do well in terms of the opportunities that come your way and the opportunities that you can seize along your way. So those are qualities that are prized in most organizations, certainly most that I've worked in. So the ability to be really good on your feet, building your skill in being able to articulate your thinking and being able to stand up in front of a room full of people, they're great skills to get under your belt at an early stage in your career. And they're immensely practical skills that are very easy to learn. Any decent presentation skills session or class on performance is going to tell you some of the basic things that you need to know about using your body language, using your voice, articulating your thinking. So that's definitely a skill set that I think is prized in organizations. Any job interview, you're likely to be asked to present your thinking in some shape or form. So if it's an area of anxiety for you, I think it's a real opportunity to get to grips with that early on and practice. The more you do it, the more you present, the more you articulate your thoughts when you're under pressure, the more skilled you'll become in making those things really feel more comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked about quite a few, I think, super helpful areas for students today. Are there any other areas you'd like to touch on based on your experience working with business leaders that could be helpful?
I think that the recognition that I work with most of the time is that most of the people I'm lucky enough to work with are really smart and know exactly what it is that they need to do to get better. And again, it's one of those skills that if we develop early on in our lives can be terribly useful. So that ability to be clear about what you're good at is really important. And people often feel very uncomfortable about articulating the things that they're great at because it can feel arrogant or overconfident. And again, we get messages planted in our thinking from early on in our lives that we mustn't be those things. We mustn't be too confident or get too big for our boots. So having a really objective sense of being clear on what you're good at, being able to answer the question, why you? Why would anybody listen to you, hire you, follow you as a leader as you go through your career? Those sorts of questions, if we can't answer them, we can't expect other people to. So having a clear sense of what you're good at and being balanced in your thinking between the stuff that you're good at and the stuff that you think you're not so good at. So you used some great examples earlier, Will, of how categorical we are in our language about what we think we can do. So you'll hear people say, oh, I'm not creative at all, or I'm terrible at this, or I'm not good at that. Whenever you hear yourself saying something like that out loud or in your own head, it's worth questioning that, because says who? Who says that you're not creative or good at maths or good at languages or good at writing essays? There's all sorts of ways in which by throwing those thoughts up in the air, new thoughts can come and we can maybe change those around. So being clear around what we're good at and why, being balanced about the things that we want to get better at so that we can be really clear and motivated on how to do that, how to build skill in new areas of confidence. Those are the things that I think are really useful for people to get to grips with, and to be able to say without any caveats in a really clean way, I'm really good at this, is very hard for lots of people. So again, being good at that earlier on in your education or your career helps you when you're in those rooms where people are wanting to know from you what it is that you have to offer. If you've got a great answer for that, then you're halfway towards showing people why they should hire you or give you a first.
That's fantastic. That's really good. Thank you, Lucy. It's been a really great conversation, and I think there's a ton of really useful advice that I think that lots of us could take on board, whatever age and stage we are with our education and our lives. So look, thank you. I'd just like to finish by asking if you could go back in time and talk to your 16-year-old self and give her a piece of advice about studies, education, life generally, career paths. What would be top of your mind? What would you say?
Well, my 16-year-old self would be horrified where I am today, because she'd be like, well, hand with the acting. Why are you not at the National Theatre? So my first job would be to reassure her that I'm okay, and we did all right. But I think the most powerful piece of advice that I would give to myself was to be kinder to myself than I was. Growing up through my education in my 20s, it was tough being an actor, and it was tough to face all the rejection that I faced. I had a lot of failure early on in my life, which is difficult to deal with. And I think the kindness would be connected to backing myself that it was going to be okay. That trust yourself, and you'll end up in the right room, and you'll have the right conversations. And so that combination of giving myself a break and just allowing myself, I'm a big believer in, for me, instinct and intuition are really important qualities that have served me well. And it's not the same for everybody, but that would have been the area that I would have talked to my 16-year-old self. Just things might happen in a way that you don't expect or want right now, and it will be for the best, and you'll end up in a much better place. So I would be excited for her too, that it wasn't the path she thought she was going to take, but it was a much richer one.
That's fantastic. Lucy, if anyone wanted to find you, wanted to look you up, where could they best do that?
The best port of call initially is our website, which is www.ideology.eu, and we spell ideology without an E, just so that doesn't confuse you. So it's IDOLOGY, and that will point you in the right direction to be able to get into contact with us.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you once again. It's been an amazing conversation. I'm very grateful. I know many of our listeners will have got a huge amount out of this conversation. So thank you for giving up your time, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much for asking me, Will. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks again, Lucy. So if you're interested in finding out more, that link is going to be in the show notes. That's www.ideology.eu, ideology.eu. Do go over and check it out if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the topics that Lucy's been talking about. And that's a wrap on the first ever episode of the Exam Study Expert podcast. Woo! Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've got a lot out of it. And I'd absolutely love to have your company here again soon. Until then, study well, and wishing you every success in your exams.
Thanks for listening to the Exam Study Expert podcast. Remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And please take a moment to write a review for our show in your podcast player.